I think, honestly, when I think about role models, I think of disappointment, which is, that's like my automatic thing.
Just so tired of not having people that I can look up to.
Yeah,
Like the people who are putting themselves in formal positions
yeah,
of saying, I'm someone worth looking at and emulating,
yeah,
and they're not, and they're manifestly not living up to that.
yeah,
I'm just so tired of it. And I'm
yeah,
trying not to cuss right now.
yeah. What I found to be most important in my spirituality is trying to have solidarity with people and trying to learn how people exist in the world.
Welcome to People Watching, a podcast where we figure out what it looks like to become the role model we've always wanted by talking with real people who found real role models in their own lives. Together, we cut through all the noise and identify better sources of hope, creativity, and wisdom as we explore how we learn to make decisions about the kind of life we want to live. So join us. Let's do some people watching. This is your host, Megan J. Robinson. Welcome to part 1 of our conversation. My guest today is Ashleigh Hill, and I have been so excited for this conversation, I can't even tell you. I met Ashleigh almost 20 years ago at a writer's group, and the first thing I learned about her is that she is an amazing poet. She was also managing a band at the time, so, instant cool factor. Ashleigh's background is in public relations, women's and gender studies, and direct service of women's shelters, volunteer service programs, and women-centric research and programming. She currently oversees conference programming and online education for a nonprofit association. And she is a graduate of Messiah College and DePaul University. She loves volunteering with animal rescues. That's how she met her beloved dog, Nellie. And she's always a good source for book and documentary recommendations. Our conversation covered a lot of topics, like growing up in evangelical and cult-like institutions, the complexities of spirituality and identity, and dealing with grief and loss in unexpected ways. I loved hearing Ashleigh talk about how solidarity came to be such a core value for her, and especially how she's learning to deal with the disappointment that comes from failed mentor relationships and role models. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome to the studio.
Happy to be here.
Hey, I love it. Love it. Ashleigh, it is so cool to see you. And I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I can't even tell you. And I was thinking about you when I was talking with Casey. And
Yeah,
now I'm thinking about Casey while I'm talking with you
me too.
because
Yeah.
I just feel like we're like the three musketeers of a long, long time ago.
Yeah. Hi, Casey. We made it. Can you believe it?
So as we get started, I always love to have our guests read with my guests some touchstones, just some rules that help shape our conversation and our expectations for each other, as well as for our audience. So I'll go ahead and start, and then we could just alternate reading these touchstones. So the first one is whatever we share is by invitation and not obligation. If either of us is not comfortable pursuing a topic, let's just say, I prefer not to share. Thank you.
Silence is also a partner in our conversation. Feel free to take a moment to reflect without immediately filling the space with words. Leave room for the inner teacher to whisper to.
Awesome. Be present as fully as possible. This is a space to acknowledge our doubts, fears, and failings as much as it is a space to share our joys, convictions, and successes.
Ask open, honest questions. If we're not sure what the other meant in the question or statement, just ask. It gives us a chance to clarify or rephrase, ask questions that we genuinely don't know the answer to. Surprise is a great catalyst of insight.
Awesome. Fantastic. One of the things that I've loved about these conversations so far is that I've had some kind of relationship with everybody I've talked to,
Mhm.
and I've still been surprised by the conversations that I've had and what I've been able to learn from people that I've known for a long time. And our conversations is no exception. I'm so excited to listen and learn from and with you. So, to get us started, Ashleigh, I would just love to hear a little bit about your life's journey, but especially those things that just really stand out to you as being really meaningful, as being especially formative, and the things that you just really feel like have brought you to who you are today.
Just a small question.
And nothing too challenging.
When you were just saying, I was thinking back and I was like, okay, so if Megan asked me to talk about like how we met, I can think of, I couldn't tell you what year or even how exactly it happened, or I could never do a timeline of from that part of my life till now. But I'm like, I remember being in a room with you and people who are like interested in writing in books. And that is it. And it was at a church. And I remember going the first time. And then from there, we have been long-term friends.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like when I think of the most meaningful parts of my life, I think it's things like that where I was like, oh, I remember sitting with some people in a room, and it's
Yeah.
not like it's all about the people and the things that you learn from people. And you and I both grew up in the we have institution heavy backgrounds as far as religion and spirituality goes. But I was thinking of what I wanted to bring to this discussion, and I was like, it's just about like people, like all these institutions weigh on you. And then what you take away is the people you were like going through the institutions with, for lack of a better word. And when I think about jobs I've had or places I volunteered or getting my master's or things like that, those all have institutions with them. But the conversations and the people that I had in all of those places are what really mattered. There was like formidable reading or writing that I did, of course, but also those things connected back to experiences with people that I had where I'd be like, oh, I see what this person is talking about because I have an experience with someone because of that. That my experience connects with what I'm reading in this book or something like that. It's not like necessarily like a brand new thing that I'm not saying I've never learned anything new, but I'm just sure the things that stick out most to me are like, oh, I'm connecting with this because I was feeling this way in my life, or I had a friend going through this thing or experiencing this thing, and then I read this, then it really connected to that, and it helped me understand it better. Or
Yeah. What? Because I know you referenced how we grew up institution heavy. My childhood was like independent, fundamental Baptist, and then we went to non-denominational evangelical church. Was that kind of your experience as well? Or like, because the specific church we were at, how did you end up finding out about the writers group that we met at?
saw it, and my family went there,
Okay.
and we went. It was for those brand new. It was a big mega church. And I guess it was probably in the bulletin or something.
Okay.
And I was just looking after college for a way to be involved in things I was interested in. So I think that's what must have happened.
Okay.
You know?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I know you had, I think your journey out of evangelicalism probably started a lot earlier than mine did. And you kicked that dust off a long time ago. How did mission year fit into that?
Yeah. So I did a year-long volunteer program that no longer exists in Chicago, but let me back up a little bit. We grew up in this institution-heavy spirituality, and I think after a while, I don't know what the catalyst was for me, other than I was like, is this what I'm doing? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to this big church. I'm going to work in my job I don't care about. And like classic things 25-year-olds go through, or at some point in your life, you go through that type of thing.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I think I don't know how the catalyst for being interested in social-minded things. I probably started somewhere in college. Honestly, it could have happened because I had a lot of gay friends in college at my Christian college. And it was like, again, trying to understand people's lives and like how best to support people and understand their lives and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And a few other things too. But I just found a year-long volunteer program that was, I guess, interdenominational, and they sent me to Chicago to volunteer for a year at a women's shelter. And I was also part of a community church there, but I was also like trying to get out of DC. I was like, I'll go where they send me and I'll probably stay there unless I really hate it. So
Yeah.
I did that, and I have a million things to say about year-long volunteer programs and all of that stuff, which is we won't talk too much about in this podcast. But I think what really stuck out to me there was just, again, people's lives that I had no clue about, working at a women's shelter and seeing what people are going through in their day-to-day lives, trying to really make it and have a life and take care of themselves and be connected to their family, and survival mode in a new way. And me as an outsider coming in thinking I'm going to do a good thing. But then I was like, do they really need me? It seems like I might be like an idiot white girl in the way. Again, that goes back to things maybe we won't be talking too much about in this podcast, but you know, it still really opened my eyes to things I had zero access to in my previous life, my younger life. And I think I stayed in Chicago. I started working at a shelter for teenagers, girls, and children in Chicago for a little bit. And because of my experiences working with those populations, I decided to get my master's degree in women's studies, just because I've always loved education. I still work in education. I'm a curious person. And I was just like, there's more to learn here than I need a better background. And what does it mean for women to not have access to everything they need? Not that there's not men who don't, but I don't care as much about that. But I think I was really looking for a grounding in that I just didn't have.
Yeah.
What
do you think was the biggest thing you took from the learning in that degree, or your experience getting that degree?
It really kicked the evangelicalism out of me. I remember at that time I was still going to a church, and I was like, what? That's all that time in my life. Like, looking back, I'm like, I had always had my feet, and even if it was a more progressive or socially minded Christian community, I'd always had a foot in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then going to spending all of my time without that as a consideration was jarring to me.
Sure.
I think it was good, but I think it also kicked up several years of grief for me, to be quite honest. So it was like a lot of learning and a lot of what? So I remember at the time being at a church where I just couldn't even go anymore. If I went, I would cry the whole time. It was just, what is this guy talking about? Reference to the pastor. And I don't think that it's any comment on that church, but more a comment of like where I was and like the lack of access to the things I needed at that church that may have existed at other churches, but we're far past that now.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think I was just, and then at the same time, I think I had a lot of people in my life who had questions, who were curious and had questions about some of the things I was learning, but I was still learning it. And it felt heavy for someone to be like, what is a transgender person? And I'd be like, I can't sit for church without crying. I can't talk with you about trans theory or like a spectrum of gender at this time. And so I think I look back at that time and I think I was trying to learn a lot and be the person I wanted to be and connect to my spirituality and care about things that I was understanding, new, and that people I couldn't talk to anyone about, And I think now I look at some religious communities and they are so good at navigating that. And I am so happy that people have access to that navigation because I had none of it, which was really difficult and is probably one of the reasons I'm just like, for most church things, there's more to say to that. But I think sometimes I'm like, I needed something then and I definitely didn't get it. And I think that has informed like a lot of my personal ethic.
Sure.
And also kicked off a few difficult years where it's, this thing that was a big part of my life, what happens now? And I spent a lot of years like searching for how to connect. We were talking before this and I was like thinking of the theologians that helped me through that time. And they were all like Catholic nuns that were like, forget this. But I just couldn't find anything other than my individual relationships. I couldn't find anything of substance there anymore, which was really hard for me as someone who had always felt very close to a Christian and my own spirituality. And in some ways, it reformed my spirituality and also gave me a little bit of an attitude where I'm like, I'm good. It's
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was still a long time ago, but that still plays around in my body.
Yeah. I remember you and Casey were like supports for me when I went to seminary, especially because I ended up at a seminary that I just describe as benignly patriarchal. And I remember one day sitting in class and another student had asked the professor, I forget why it was relevant to the class topic for the day, but another student had asked the professor about God's sovereignty and following God's will and blah, 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 blah. And the answer was a very typical reformed, God has a plan, but it's not like you can necessarily know what that plan is. You just have to live and blah, blah, blah. And I just remember, I even think I took out my phone. It was like under my desk texting Casey. I'm like, that's how, but I just remember feeling this shock to my system. And it was like mental and emotional and spiritual shock. And it's as significant as someone had pushed me off the chair onto the floor. And I was just like, I'm done. I'm done with this. This doesn't make sense to me. Like the logical contortions that you have to go through in order to give this kind of answer just doesn't make sense to me. And there's whole theological worlds behind that. Again, not going to get into. But like that, like for you, like your experience in going through women's studies, my experience in going through seminary was just there were just a lot of answers that I was very familiar with.
Yeah. You're like, I'm paying to hear this? New things here. Yeah.
And then being introduced to those new things, but having them framed in those old ways, like in the same way, it was just like, this is not working.
Yeah.
This is a square peg, round hole kind of thing. And then just like you, just feeling very much like the evangelical world and the institutions within that world were just familiar.
Yeah.
It's just very easy to go in. You know the language, you know the postures, you know how the script runs.
Yeah.
And just ending up in that for a long time and then just finding more thinkers and more people who just opened up different ways of understanding relationship with the divine, of understanding relationship with yourself, with others, with your responsibilities to the world. Just very different.
Yeah, I feel like something that struck me was like, in my experience, there's nothing new that there's nothing new. Like even though I've been out of evangelical culture, even though it's always in my heart, I still the things I hear or like the things I hear from family, I hear it as if I have always heard it. There's nothing new. And then out in other things I was learning or experiences in the world, there's always new things like that you didn't know. But even again, nothing new under the sun, but there's always things you didn't know. But back here, it's all the same. God is sovereign, and that's the end. It's very binary and the same. And it's once you start to learn other things, you're like, it doesn't fit in here, but this has always been my reference. What is my reference?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard when you realize that's a sphere you no longer feel comfortable in. And like you were saying at the beginning of the conversation, that the things in your life that mean the most are the experience, that the people, the conversations you had. And it's hard when there's just some conversations you can't have, or there's just paths off that conversation that you can't go down with some people. And it's hard. It's an occasion of love, probably on both sides, to figure out how do you maintain some kind of a relationship, if that's possible, and still carry both that love and that grief.
Yeah, and I think when that path away becomes you, or those paths between become you, and you're like, I started to feel a lot like I can't access myself anymore. I definitely connect with what you're saying about that.
Yeah. What's your faith journey been like since then? I hear you on every time I think about going to church, I just get so tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, there are good churches out there. I wholeheartedly believe this. It's just the outliers that make the news. I'm just exhausted at the thought of finding it.
When I was listening to your interview with Casey, she had said she had connected with her current beliefs about justice and things like that through a lot of biblical stories and things like that. And I was thinking, and I was like, I definitely didn't. I feel like, and maybe that's why I am not invested in that type of spirituality anymore, is because I feel like I found my interest in justice issues and in trying to be an accountable and invested person outside of any type of religion. And then I went back and found it then. But at that point, it felt like too late, where I was like, it exists both places. So why would I stay in this place where I didn't find it originally, or where I didn't feel like my pathway was allowed at that time? So I think, I think sometimes I struggle with how to talk about my spirituality, because talking about it feels I have to use language I don't want to use anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
I think a big part of I was listening to a podcast the other day. It was like a love and relationship podcast, two non-religious people, but they were talking about spirituality, and someone on it said, I see myself as a spiritual seeker. And I was like, in my body, I was like, what? You don't know about that. That was my immediate response, because that language is still so like religious, even though this person had they authentically came up with that. And I was like, I don't know. Yeah. So I know, like, in what I found to be most important in my spirituality is trying to have solidarity with people and trying to learn how people exist in the world. And I'm someone who I meditate and I go on walks and I do yoga and all that stuff too, but I don't know that I have a label for it. If I was to still call myself a Christian, I'd be like, okay, I don't know. It feels like it doesn't have very much meaning to me anymore, even though, like I said, that's always in my heart and body. And it's such a big culture that you can't help but engage with it in some way. And some things are still really important to me. I think back about like some theologians I like, or sometimes a Bible verse that is important to me, but sometimes those things are helpful and sometimes they feel too connected to something that was real. So it's coming on here to talk with you. I was like, what are we going to talk about? Even though I totally trust you, how do I still manage this thing? And it's also interesting to be like, okay, so I'm not this anymore, but how do I define myself now? And it like matters, but does it matter?
Sure.
That's where I feel like I am in that place now.
Yeah. I remember.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I remember a few years ago when I was trying a dating app, which just, if you like it, fine, but for me,
Yeah.
no. But there was a guy, like, made a connection, and he had asked, I think he had made it clear in his profile that he worked in some sort of part-time ministry,
Yeah.
and he had asked, like, a DM, like, "Where do you go to church?" Just at this moment,
Are we still doing that? Like,
I know, I mean, I just had this moment.
well,
I guess I should have expected that question. I don't know that question.
yeah.
And I just was like, I have friends who help me keep company with Jesus. And I don't know. Actually, it was something you said to me a long time ago. And I think at the time you were going to a spiritual director. And you said she had made the comment to you that a lot of churches don't know what to do with or for people who are relatively self-sustaining in terms of.
True. Yeah.
And I've thought about that a lot. And it's not that I think that we're all capable of doing everything by ourselves all the time, but there is something to that kind of necessarily needing all of the mediation or all of the structure.
Yeah.
In order to have the relationship with the divine. But I think about that a lot. And I feel like that was, from you, that was a really helpful insight.
Yeah.
It just planted itself and just given me some comfort that whatever the religious and spiritual journey looks like that I am on, I'm not wrong for being on it.
Yeah. There's a whole history of people, especially women, who were like, this doesn't fit for me anymore. I feel like so much of my past experiences, like, okay, I go to church and then some guy who went to seminary whose life is totally different than mine is up there like interpreting something for me. I'm like, and I think this was part of my step away is I would feel like the pastor was talking about something and I'd be like, do you know that people in the city don't have enough to eat? Or do you know that women get regularly sexually assaulted up here? What are you up here talking about in V? I was just like, and that's where I was at the time, and it's too reductive now, but also true.
Sure.
In a broader sense. And I think I still in some way carry that with me when I go into religious environments, whether that's healthy or not to bring in, because there are places that are doing a great job taking care of people in their community and being with people and not pushing the belief agenda on them, etc.
Yeah. I know one of the things that I really want to dig into with you, because when you had submitted your questions, when we started talking about doing this podcast together, and this podcast is about role models. Like, how do real people pay attention to the influences in their life? How do specific people, like, what influences do we take on in our life? And so you had some really interesting questions, comments, insights about like mentors and that kind of influence. But I would love to get to that, but I would also just to broad concept. When you think of role models, what comes to mind for you?
I think honestly, when I think about role models, I think of disappointment, which is that's like my automatic thing. And I think it goes back to the things that we were talking about and that's not the only thing that's not the only thing that being a role model means to me. But I think in looking for a place and people to like who have gone before me, for a lot of time, I was like, there's no one. Or I feel like maybe people who I had considered a role model or something, they just didn't have the capability to be able to. And I think also I think we'll get more into this, but I think when I think of role models and mentorship in the world, I've seen so much like manipulation that comes with people who are in a role model position that what is it? I guess I'm reflecting my question back to you. What does it mean to be full model? Does this mean you meet with this person regularly? Does this mean it's someone you don't know them, but you read all their books? Is this, I don't know. That's my answer.
Sure, yeah, fair. I think
Like,
that's part of why I latched onto this concept and why I'm trying to unpack it. One of the key memories that stands out for me that kind of was like a seed for this whole journey up to now for me was, again, I was working in an evangelical institution and had gone into work one day, and my coworker was like, "Oh, have you heard about so?" And it was a pastor, the latest entry in pastors behaving badly kind
yeah,
of thing. And looking back on it, like, I remember my reaction was just this resignation. Of course, like, not
yeah,
surprised at all,
yeah,
not sad at all,
yeah. A dime a
not
dozen. What did you expect? That's my,
it was very much, what did you expect?
uh,
And looking back on it now, I'm way more sad about it now. That's my reaction because it's so prevalent. And I remember saying to my coworker, I said, "You know what? I'm just so tired of not having people that I can look up to."
yeah,
Like, these are the people who are putting themselves in formal positions
yeah,
of saying, I'm someone worth looking at and emulating.
yeah,
And they're manifestly not living up to that. And
yeah,
I'm just so tired of it. And I'm
yeah,
trying not to cuss right now.
yeah.
And so I 100% get what you're saying about
Mhm.
disappointment is just looking around and being like, I would like to be a Christian that I read about in the text. I would like to be a Christian that I've seen, because I've seen good people. I would also just like to be a good person. I
Yeah,
would like to be someone who does as little harm as possible in the world and tries to
yeah,
do some good.
yeah,
And it's just, who is that?
yeah,
It's not a blanket, complete absence, but it is something where someone asked me, who's your role model? And I was like,
yeah. More loaded than we thought. Yeah.
yeah. And a couple of my very strong role models are dead white dudes, which is fine. They were very formative, but I would also like to be able to have women, dead or alive. Just because they're not on this earthly plane of existence doesn't mean I can't
Yeah.
still learn from them. Doesn't mean they can't still be an influence. Yeah, no, I get that disappointment. Oh, man, loud and clear. And I
But
think
I
that's, go ahead.
also we're set up to be like, to have someone and then assume they can do no wrong. I think it's also okay to look back and be like, from this person, I took this type of modeling and I can't emulate my entire life after them, but I can take this one thing. Or
Sure.
I think we've already talked about, I think you can find a type of role model and the people that you're close to and the experiences you have gone through is a type of role model.
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
it? Can you combine a lot of people that you've read about and make that a type of, role model?
Yeah.
And then also when you do that, you don't have to know all the things you disagree, about. You don't have
Sure.
to be,
Yeah.
there's not always the same type of disappointment in that. You're forming something that, you have a little more control over.
Yeah. I think, like, I've been trying to think through what are factors that contribute to, I think, see what you think. I just came up with this a couple weeks ago and I'm still turning it over. A role model is someone who shows you what to love and how to love it.
I like that.
So, because one of the other things that I've been seeing a lot lately is I've heard people say we have no role models don't exist anymore. And I'm just like, we had them. We just don't like them.
Yeah.
And so I've been wondering if role models is something like a role model is something less formal even than a mentor. Like my concept of a mentor is very intentional. Like you have perhaps like you are mentoring toward a specific goal or for a specific purpose. It has a lot more structure and intentionality around it. And within that, a mentor can be a role model. But I almost feel like a mentor is more like a skill base, some sort of, I would like to see X happen in my life, and a mentor is going to help guide me into that transformation or that change. A role model, you have like family, your immediate sphere, family and the people that you let in. You have communal, which is like your second and third spaces. And then you have aspirational, which could be people that you see online, people like fictional characters or historical characters or a global character, people that are on a global stage. So I think you can, so thinking about those kinds of influences, C.S. Lewis is a big influence on me. He's a huge role model. I will never know who that person, I will never know who he is on a day-to-day basis. But I've spent time with him. I've read I've read as much of his stuff as I could. I've read about him. I've seen how he has responded in different contexts to different situations, different questions. So I've gotten a sense of him, whether or not he's consistent or congruent. He always seemed to take responsibility.
Yeah.
Like if he said something and he was challenged on it or he was correct on it, he would take responsibility for that. He would take responsibility for the fact that he put things into the world for other people to pick up.
Yeah.
Proximity, I guess we could call his books proximity, but in terms of spending a lot of physical space with them, that doesn't work. But those are all things like time, proximity, congruity, responsibility, influence, like all of that kind of contributes to the influence that somebody has. And you can see by the way they live their life what they love.
Yeah.
And you can see by the way they live their life how they are loving that. And you can tell, and from that, you can go, that resonates. Well, I like that. I'm going to pay more attention to this person and let the influence be a lot, like, come in. Those are the things that I'm thinking when I think of role model.
I think that has a lot more. What you're saying has so much more to do with autonomy too. It's not, I feel like when I talk about manipulation, I've seen situations where and here's your role model, but instead we're talking about people you're choosing, ideas that you're choosing, things like that.
Yeah. And I'd love to think more with you about that experience of manipulation or about that idea of manipulation, whether I wonder if that's related to responsibility, because
Say more about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because responsibility means, because I think we're always watching and being watched. We're never not, like, we're never wholly private.
Yeah.
And so responsibility, to me personally, it means every interaction I have with another human being, I own my responsibility to treat them as a human being, like not as a robot, not as a problem to be solved, not as an obstacle to be removed, but as a person who is also bringing their own self to the interaction. And I own my responsibility for how I want, like the taste I want to leave in this person's mouth. I interact with them. And manipulation is a way, I'm wondering if that's a way to disown responsibility.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Or I think it also has to go with you're trying to, if you get set up with, okay, here's your mentor, it often comes with the backing of an institution. Instead of trying to help this person grow in the way that they'll grow, it's like helping a person grow in the way like that this institution says that they should grow. So there's not a lot of room for what you're talking about, guiding people in the way that they would naturally go. It's okay, we're going up this way instead of you're going this way. And like, how can I go with you?
Yeah. I would love to know. I'm looking at some of the things that you had written down before. And you had written, can you be your own mentor? And how would you do that? And
That's a great question.
I don't know.
Well, where should I play it?
So do we want to answer that
Yeah.
question?
I don't know. I think that's something I always think about. Is it important? Is it important to have one? Or are you like what we were talking about before? Or is it okay to be more self-sustaining as long as you pick up things that help you to be a more responsible or person, or like a person with more solidarity? Is that fine? Do you have times in your life with when maybe you would want someone and maybe they don't have to last for forever?
Yeah. When you were shifting from the evangelical sphere and finding your way because I feel like both you and Casey in your own ways have really been like eye-opening for me in terms of thinking about issues of social justice and even just opening up the concept of solidarity. How did you come to those concepts? How did you come to those as values for yourself? Were there people that kind of modeled that for you or introduced that for you? What made those attractive aside from possibly they were just always part of you?
That's a good question. Going back to what we've already talked about, there was definitely times where I was like, I wish I had someone in solidarity with me here. Not in that I had people who were with me, but
Yeah.
I wish that I had someone in solidarity with me who knew what I needed. I'm not saying that is what everyone has to be. I think there's a spectrum of that,
Mhm.
but I think that was a little bit of a driving force for me to like my own experience and being like, I definitely had support in people who were trying to understand. But I think also it would have been really life-changing to have someone who already understood. And I think there's a spectrum of solidarity. Trying to understand versus knowing what's going on finds yourself or offer that in different situations. So I think for me, especially with my background in like women's studies and issues of sexuality and gender, I think it just became really important for me to try and be even if I wasn't someone who had experienced or felt in my body all of these things, like someone who really tried to be on the understanding part of solidarity, so that if someone wanted to talk to me about something, or if I could help explain something to someone who was like on this lower end, I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't be kind of specific. I think a lot of my beliefs have come and have just developed over time. There wasn't a one thing.
Mhm. Yeah. This is a little bit of a sidebar, but I was on Hulu the other day, and one of the movies that was recommended was the movie Mortal Kombat. Do you remember going to see that?
Did you read Mortal Kombat to me?
I remember this is because I had just gotten my cancer diagnosis not too long before. And I remember, I think someone else came with us. I can't remember.
I do actually remember this. I think my friend Bethany went with us, and I can remember that because I have a picture with her there. Yeah, that is so funny. Yeah, that's when that happened. I like did not even remember that. Yeah.
And I remember, and in fact, I was telling this to someone the other day. I remember it was heavy. Like it was a lot. 29 years old, cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
And everyone was just dealing with it in their own way. And I remember meeting you and your friend at the theater and we get into this movie and it is just bonkers terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it is bonkers crazy. It is terrible. And I always love going to movies with you because you just talk back to the screen. And I think it ended up becoming a very interactive viewing experience in the theater. And I just remember laughing my head off. And you were clipped. To this day, it's one of my favorite memories and one of my favorite.
Oh my gosh! Thanks for sharing that with me. I did not.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. And the reason it is because you were just we're going to a movie. That's like, this is just a normal everyday thing. And we're going to a movie and it's a terrible movie. And I'm talking
about
it's
what we need right now.
It just meant so much to me to be normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what it is. It's like, how can I function in a way that affirms that this person is normal? Again, nothing is new under the sun. There's no version of you that has not existed, period. And even if I don't 100% understand it, I'm not going to tell you that it's not worth understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't bring myself to watch Mortal Kombat because I'm just like, I'm pretty sure it's even worse than I remember.
I'm starting positive. Yeah.
But yeah, I think even without you necessarily having the word for it at the time, I think you've always been that person who's very willing to just let the experience stand. And I think that's a really unusual skill to have in any time. But I think it's really, and I think it's something that I've always appreciated about you very much.
That I really appreciate you sharing that. I think that, I think that's how going back to sitting in church and being like, what are you talking about? To me, it was like, you're not talking about what's actually going on, but the world, or you're not addressing or engaging with what's going on. But I think that is that exact experience guides a lot of how I am in the world, I think. Not that I'm always good at it, but I think there's the Bishop Gene Robinson. I don't know if you know about him, but
I know the name. I'm not like super familiar, but I know the name.
Like potential role model, if you will. But I watched this video he put out so long ago, and I was looking for it and I can't find it, but he talked about this idea of thoroughness versus speed, where he says, get were you paying enough attention? But I think that it connects to this, where it's, are you seeing what's going on, or are you going fast to get to the end of your 50-minute sermon? Or are you going fast to line up with the way you're supposed to be? Or are you like trying to understand the thoroughness of a person's experience, knowing that you won't understand all of it, but are you open to understanding all of the experience and not being scared of it, or not thinking like, oh, this belief will rock my world? Are your beliefs set up in a way that a new person existing and their experience isn't going to like rock your belief system? Not that if that happens, it's bad, but are you I think this conversation is helping me frame that, but I think that's what solidarity means, like trying to be thorough and not so that you can critique something, but so you can understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And be available if you can.
Yeah. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss part 2 of this conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope you found something that resonated with you and that helps you become more hopeful, creative, and wise in your own life. Please share this with someone who you think would love this conversation. And subscribe, and leave a comment or a review to boost the show. Shalom.